we have two contrasting situations in our readings today. On the one hand, the Pharisees are having dinner with Jesus. They are close to him, but only physically. They remain very far from him spiritually. On the other hand, in the second reading, St. Paul is in prison as he is writing his letter to the Philippians. They are physically very far from him. But St. Paul says, just thinking about them, just praying for them makes them very present in him spiritually. And by the way, this is the passage that inspired the composition of that popular charismatic song, I thank my God each time I think of you, and when I pray for you, I pray with joy. We had a teleconference last Wednesday, October 24, in the CBF SEA, meaning Catholic Biblical Federation, Southeast Asian Subregion. The participants were from everywhere around the world. The teleconference host was in Germany. The keynote speaker, Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, was in Rome. One of the reactors was in Thailand. The other two were in the Philippines. And in the audience, there were people from the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States. There were followers from Hong Kong, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Myanmar, and South Korea. We had to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening at the same time to everyone, depending on where they were following from. I was suddenly overwhelmed by the blessing of digital technology and the thought that in spite of the pandemic which has kept us far apart from each other, we have found a new way of being together virtually through digital teleconferencing. Well, even this online live streaming is followed regularly on a daily basis by almost, more than 20 to 40,000 daily. And you are following from different countries all over the world. Isn't that a wonderful blessing? We were actually supposed to have a biblical conference this year in Thailand. Like most other conferences, it had to be canceled and rescheduled. Hopefully next year kung pwede na. And so we settled instead for a 3-hour teleconference in September, only to find out that when our keynote speaker came to the Philippines, he tested COVID positive, the Cardinal himself. Well, fortunately, he remained asymptomatic and he recovered pretty soon, and we were able to hold it last Wednesday, October 24. Let us admit it, before the pandemic happened, we had already begun to realize the downside of digital technology. We knew that it was keeping family members distant from each other. Families would eat together but not talk together, not talk to each other because they are glued on their gadgets. I have siblings and friends and acquaintances who have consciously avoided the social media. Wala sila sa Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, because they have associated it with fake news, political trolls, pornography, online gambling, everything negative. And then suddenly, the technology became our very lifeline. for online learning for schools, for liturgical live streaming, for meetings and webinars, for regular contact among families, for online monitoring of patients, etc. Now, it has become the only way for people to grieve a departed family member together through online funeral services and online eulogies, or even a way of gathering together for birthdays and anniversaries, albeit virtually. The pandemic has forced us to cover our faces with masks and face shields, to behave almost like hypochondriacs who have to wash or disinfect hands regularly, distance from each other, avoid physical contact, and actually do all of this as an expression of care and as a conscious effort to save each other's lives. I can only imagine what it will be like when all of this is over. Could the Lord have deliberately allowed us to be deprived of physical intimacy, of touching, of kisses, handshakes, embraces, or even huddling together, things that we have tended to take for granted before, so that we can look forward to being physically close to one another again when this crisis is over? You know, here at San Roque Cathedral, regularly on Sundays before, people would be skin to skin, magkakadikit-dikit na, standing room. But now, you have a handful of people. And for a good reason. St. Paul, in our first reading, is teaching us how to be spiritually close even when we are physically far from each other. How to remain spiritually united even when we are miles apart by just thinking of each other, by praying and thanking God for each other, by remembering one another. Perhaps we realize now how important it is to remember, because we refuse to dismember from each other. And so St. Paul says, I hold you in my heart. I long for you with the affection of Jesus Christ. Whenever I open the comments on our live stream broadcasting for this Mass, I find it very touching, you know. How many of you really go out of your way to list down the people you want to pray for? Imagine how heartwarming it is for your loved ones who might be on another side of the world. How heartwarming it is if they find out they happen to be following the same online live streaming and find out that you have remembered them and that you have offered the Mass for them. I have one little request, which I have said before, but which I feel the need to say again. Please, let us stop using the expression social distancing. I-Google nyo nga yung salitang yon. You will find out that it has a very negative meaning. What does social distancing mean? It means consciously avoiding certain people on the basis of color, religion, gender, social status, or political affiliation. It means discrimination. We can be physically distant without having to become socially distant from one another. It is when we close our minds to certain individuals, like the Pharisees in the gospel are doing with Jesus, that we get used to social distancing. When we allow bias and prejudice to keep us far apart from each other. We can be so close, and yet so far. But when we learn to think of one another's welfare, or even just pray for one another, or even just remember each other, we can be so far and yet still so close to each other.
I thank my God each time I think of you, and when I pray for you, I pray with joy. I thank my God.